Welcome back to another episode of Hungry for the Word Pod. Today's episode we're going to call The Resurrection Without Exception. And particularly to me, um, I'll say this is um, a wide topic, not necessarily one that we can tackle in a single episode, but it's, I think, part of the reason that Jesus was so adamant. Um, it's evidenced in a couple places, but he was so adamant about forgiveness that forgiveness is um, it's a cyclical thing, and oftentimes forgiveness feels one directional. Um, and a lot of times, I mean, think about in relationships. You forgive your partner, your spouse, your friend, and in the back of your mind, it's almost like they owe you a debt because you've forgiven them. And
Mhm.
I think about the amount of canceling that we see in society today and the amount of um, just really harsh criticism that is everywhere. I mean, we feel it internally, we experience it, but everybody, it feels like, who has a voice, has a platform, spends at least a portion of their time, if not most of their time, critiquing what everyone else is doing. And I think that part of Jesus returning is maybe less how we've thought of it traditionally, in the sense of the man Jesus returns floating on a cloud, as much as he returns spiritually. His The evidence that he's returned is the fact that his message, his word, his way of living, his way of forgiving has reached a sort of critical mass on the earth. Um, we talk about cycles and generational cycles or addiction cycles or things of that nature, and how Jesus was willing to let the cycle end with him and let his enemies touch him and be be the final, if you will, sacrifice for all of sin, and accepting the atonement for yourself, accepting the resurrection for yourself. I think when John is talking about, you're lying to yourself if you think that you love God and you don't love another person. I think it's another way of saying exactly this. If you have accepted the atonement and what Jesus has done, if you accept the resurrection and yet withhold it from someone downstream from you, withhold it from someone you hate, someone who doesn't deserve it, someone whose actions and thoughts are completely the opposite of what you would do, then you've actually withheld it from yourself. There is some part of you that
Mm.
thinks that God wouldn't forgive you for that. And so, in perceiving that unworthiness in yourself, you understandably but invariably attack it in another person. And I think that part of Jesus's message, which has offended people for centuries, starting with the Pharisees and pretty much every religious leader ever since then, it's been a rejection of the fact that God would do this for everyone, including the person that you consider to be your enemy. So again, long intro. You
Mm.
can tell this is a pretty
Yeah.
big topic to unpack, but what's coming up for you?
Well, the Lord's Prayer that we talked about in the past, in Matthew 16, part of that is forgive our trespasses
Hmm.
as we forgive those that trespass against us.
Hmm.
And that's not a measuring stick. That is the heart position and condition. if you
Mm,
will, that we're able to receive forgiveness from him only to the degree that we're able to give that away to other people, as you
mm,
just said.
totally.
And, you know, the righteousness is the stumbling stone of the gospel. And like you said, for centuries, this has offended people because it started with the children of Israel and the nation of Israel that was walking with God, and then the Gentiles were added
Hmm.
um, upon Jesus's resurrection, and they were like, "Wait, we have been doing this stuff forever. You can't just give righteousness away for free."
Mm,
And that's what you're talking about. That is the stumbling stone of the gospel. That yes, he can, and he does, and it's a
hmm.
great plan, but it will offend you if you feel like you've worked really hard for it.
Right. And again, I think that there's two parts to that. Number one is the working hard for it because you feel as though it's wages when you've worked for it. You feel as though
Ah,
you deserve the forgiveness because you've done XYZ. You're following the law. And like I said at the beginning, it's evidenced in several places how important forgiveness is to Jesus. And the two that came to my mind right off the bat were the Lord's Prayer, because again, he spends the first half of it honoring God, and the second half of it saying, thanks for our daily bread. Let us forgive and help us when we're tempted. Those are like the three things
yeah.
that we need. That's the three-pronged approach. You get provided for, you provide forgiveness and are forgiven, and then you go out in the world, you know? But anyways,
Mhm.
that was the first one. And the second one was the woman caught in adultery. And I think that they, really thought that they were going to trip up Jesus with this. And more than anything, I think that they wanted to see that he was like them, which is, the fatherhood of Satan is to, um, I know it's the steal, kill, and destroy, essentially. And I'll say lie, cheat, and kill are the words that came to my mind.
Mhm.
But they want to see that he'll kill someone because that is how Satan gets you down there with him. And he says, neither do I condemn you. And on the one hand, he's spoken about himself earlier and said, to show you that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, I'll say it to this man. And the man gets up and walks, the paralytic. But
Mhm.
then he turns around and tells us, and I think he does it in Mark, John, and Luke, whoever you forgive will be forgiven, and who you don't won't be. And again, the ego takes that as we become the measuring stick.
Mm.
And the flipping that around, if you will, when you understand the true meaning of God's will, his heart for all of humanity, all of creation, is he's actually telling you the inverse of the truth, is that when you don't forgive someone else, you're actually withholding it from yourself. And so
Mm.
you can't stand in my fullness. And
Mm.
like I said, you look around the world and you see how quick everyone it is today to jump down someone's throat. They made this mistake. They're unqualified. They did this. They did that. And uh, again, it's not for us to decide, you know. And I think that that's easier
But
said
isn't
than
that an
done.
indication, as you said, it's we have a bunch of people that aren't walking in the atonement.
Period.
It's a testimony to it, because
Exactly.
when you can't forgive others, right? When you feel like you have to point out all the
Hmm.
flaws, that's really what's happening in your heart.
Exactly. It's evidence of hurt people hurt people, And
Hmm.
those who are condemned, condemn. And I think
Mm.
that's part of why at the beginning, Jesus' message spread like wildfire to the whole of the earth because here's the free gift of salvation. Here's the free gift of no longer condemned. It doesn't matter what your social status is. It doesn't matter if you're homeless or you're the richest of the rich. The idea is, I know he tells the parable of the man who's forgiven the big debt and doesn't forgive the smaller debts. That
Yeah.
is exactly what we're talking about. You know, the driving home from the gym last night, and uh, we've talked about driving before and how that tends to be a thing that gets under my skin. And I think that it's partly because of that. There is some type of internal condemnation going on that I feel has propelled me to the heights of good driver. And so when I'm driving with others and they don't do what I would have done, I get frustrated. But I noticed last night that I have done what they're doing. It's like you have a car on your left and a car in front of you. And I'm going to speed up because the car in front of me is going slowly and the car on my left isn't going as fast as I can. So I'm going to speed up and split them. And the car on my left speeds up literally just enough to close the gap, but then slows down so that I can't go anywhere. And I'm really frustrated at the pettiness. It's so frustrating and annoying. And to recognize in that moment that, okay, on the one hand, I've probably done that to someone. In fact, I know I've done that to someone. And I was justified in my mind in when and why I did it, teaching them a lesson. And so to be able in that moment, and again, I know it sounds almost silly, but more than forgiving them, not saying the words, okay, okay, I forgive them. It's not a big deal. It's picturing myself walking into heaven. And here's this man who did this thing because he's hurt. He didn't do it because he's in an excellent mood right now and everything's all gravy and he has nothing else going on. Walking in and saying, Father, I've blocked people out before. I've been petty. I've sped up so that they couldn't pass, even though it really was no skin off my back if they passed me at all. And I want this person to know you so I can let the cycle die with me. I can die on the cross, so to speak. And again, even talking about this, I'm even hearing my own ego say how small of an example this is and how silly it is and how who do you think you are kind of thing almost. Um, but the choosing to forgive him, the choosing to I'll let that cycle stop with me. That I'm not going to condemn you for the thing that you know you did wrong because you know you did it wrong. And if you were standing in the atonement, if you were standing in the joy and the love of the Father, no one ever who has stood in the joy of the love and the Father wants to do something that's harmful or negative out in the world. And so not standing in that as more often than not, as the church, as Christians, we want to condemn the people who aren't standing in the love of the Father, thinking that condemning them will guilt them into standing in the love of the Father, which is
But what
more
does this?
evidence of how we got in there than it is what
Yeah,
God's message is for us to do.
because what will kindness will lead to repentance, right? That's
Exactly.
what they're going to see more is that regardless of what they do, that we're still just kind and loving to them,
Hmm.
you know?
Exactly. Um, and so I think that's a good kind of segue um, to shift from talking about what people do to sort of bringing it back to home. Something that's alive to me right now is this is from First Corinthians 15:42 to 49. Um, and for context, in First Corinthians 15, Paul is talking about resurrection, and he's kind of dispelling a rumor amongst the Corinthians that Jesus wasn't actually resurrected, like it was a metaphorical resurrection kind of thing. And he's talking about that, but then he comes to talk about the resurrection body specifically. But he's talking about all of creation, and then right here, it is a few sentences, so bear with me. And like I said, we might have a little bit to unpack. But he says, "So it is with the resurrection of the dead. What is sown is perishable, what is raised is imperishable. It is sown in dishonor, it is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown in a physical body, it is raised in a spiritual body. Thus it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. But it is not the spiritual that is first, but the physical, and then the spiritual. The first man was from the earth, a man of dust. The second man is from heaven. As was the man of dust, so are those who are of the dust. And as is the man of heaven, so are those who are of heaven. Just as we have borne the image of the man of dust, let us also bear the image of the man of heaven. So again, that's a long one, but I want to focus on kind of the first couple sentences. What is sown is perishable, what is raised is imperishable. It is sown in dishonor, it is sown in weakness, it is sown in a physical body. And part of what I've noticed on my own journey is uh, a lack of accepting the atonement for myself. I
Mm.
continue to live in very strong self condemnation. And from the 30 and 60 fold perspectives, if you will, considering them a court, 30 fold is sort of the local court. The 60 fold is like the, state circuit court. And then the 100 fold is the Supreme Court. What the Supreme Court says goes. And appealing to these 30 and 60 fold courts, you'll get their judgment. And so walking into the Father, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, condemning myself, disqualifying myself beforehand, recognizing the perishable, the dishonor, the weakness, the physical body nature of some of these things that I do or think or say. And to recognize that the irony, if you will, the paradox of the kingdom is from that weakness, from that dishonor, from the physical body is how what is imperishable comes to be. It's that going to the Father and withholding forgiveness from myself. So assuming that, I've been praying for some stuff and I'm not getting it. And then in the back of my mind, I know why I'm not getting it. I have the reasons. I have the knowledge of good and evil. It's because I've done this or not done that. It's I haven't done this. I must still need to learn a lesson. I must need to become still. And all of that comes from an ego that is so insanely attached to the pride and condemnation system, because when I have felt pride, when I've done the thing well and it goes well for me, that is really addicting. It's such a
Feels
hard
good.
thing to walk
Yeah.
away from. Exactly. It feels good to be good at something. It feels good to win. It feels good to have the knowledge. Um, and so to recognize that this sort of And I'll say that it's common in the church, but again, common in myself, that's what we're talking about, is this hypertension of low self-esteem and lack of confidence and false humility mixed with the pride and condemnation system, the knowledge of good and evil. It's the do good, do bad, get bad system. That is of the earth. That's what we fell to. And ironically, so much of my prayer the last couple of weeks where I thought I was praying, if you will, the words I was supposed to say, the things I was supposed to think, what I felt in my heart to ask for. Ultimately, I I was asking him for stuff that he has already given me. I'm asking him to do something that he's already done. I want to be free of this old man, and I have been given that. So the
Mm.
problem isn't that he needs to give it to me for a second time. The problem is me not standing in it. And again, here's the hypertension. It is because I'm doing something wrong, but what I'm doing wrong has nothing to do with my actions. It has everything to do with disqualifying myself and condemning myself before I even walk in the door. Um, I've heard it said that the way that the resurrection worked with Jesus is that he took all of us into his heart so that what's in your heart, what's in love, can actually make it through the fire and go to heaven. So we are on the throne, seated at God's right hand, one with the Son, one with the Father, because Jesus took us into his heart. And recognizing that when I would go in, quote unquote, go in and pray for stuff and ask the Father, I was not holding myself in my heart. I was actually hating myself and
Mm.
condemning myself and really sick of myself and thinking that I'm going to go to the Father and ask, what do I need to do to this guy so that I don't hate him? Let him become what you have spoken over him so that then I can love him. And therein lies the rub. The withholding of the love on this side of perfection is the whole issue. It is the reason that this cycle has continued for the 2000 years since Jesus left, is our attachment to loving something once it's perfect, our insistence on not our insistence on giving condemnation and withholding true forgiveness until the person deserves it. And how can I ever hope to truly give other people the gospel, other people the good news of salvation, if I'm condemning myself? No matter what the words are that come out of my mouth, if I'm standing in a place of condemning and disqualifying self, I can't give them anything that they're not already sitting into, you know?
That's good. It reminds me of First Corinthians 13, where it talks about love. And love is God kind of love, not Hollywood love, where I've got
Right.
this warm feeling or conditional love, what you're talking about. I'm gonna, when you deserve it, I'll give it to you.
Mhm.
But God's kind of love is holding things precious and giving things
Mm,
value even before they deserve it, which is what he did for us.
totally.
And so then you read that chapter like that, and without that, you're just a gong. You're just a noisy cymbal.
Yep.
I mean,
Well, and it even says you can give over your body to be burned, but
yeah,
if you're not love, you don't gain anything. And
yeah.
I think about how many potential martyrs, and I mean no disrespect to their name or what they did, but how many people died through the history of Christianity thinking that to die because that was God's instruction or Jesus's instruction, that they will gain righteousness having done it. Whereas what Jesus teaches us is that, and Paul as well, you actually can't gain righteousness through works, period. That system is over
Mhm.
and done with. Jesus is now your righteousness, period. Christ is that. And when you stand on the side of wanting to gain it, you have locked yourself out of the kingdom from the inside. You have disqualified yourself from the free gift of what he's trying to give you. And I think of Chronicles of Narnia and the moment when Aslan, who's Jesus, submits himself to the enemy to be killed. And at first they shave him and he lays down, and all the, the things that represent the demons are kind of hesitant to approach him. Are we allowed to do this? Is this going to happen? And then one reaches out, pulls a tuft of hair and swipes it with a knife, and then all of them go in. And the idea that Jesus for all time has become the sacrifice that let himself be shaved, that let himself go to the cross, that died, went down to Sheol, and was resurrected, so that made it illegal for you to self atone. And
Mhm.
the whole nature of religion comes with the predetermined knowledge that you must atone. And therein lies the rub. You're not wrong. You do need forgiveness. And yet, accepting what Jesus has done means that you're accepting forgiveness. And here comes the parable of Mark 4 again. You don't, in an instant, the second you say you accept forgiveness, your soul probably doesn't believe that wholeheartedly just yet. You've got some wounds, you've got some past experience, you've got both internal and external unforgiveness going on. And
Mhm.
the Lord will unwind that spiral at the pace of your soul, but ultimately he's faithful to complete that work because that is the work. His
Mhm.
will on all the earth is that the atonement be complete. It's that the resurrection be complete, that once there is no need for forgiveness here, it will be on earth as it is in heaven. There's no sickness in heaven. There's no death. There's no unforgiveness. There's no pain. And yes, we're in a physical world, but are you willing to let the buck stop with you and take responsibility as a mature son to say, I don't want to participate in this cycle anymore. I will let the, if you will, the negative end of the cycle land on me and still go no further. And
Mhm.
easier said than done, especially when you are in your mind trying to do it as opposed to connecting with the truth that the being you now are does that. That is its nature. That is who you are. And in believing it, and then your soul falling in line, it will just be expressed through your body, through your mind, through your actions, through your words.
Mm. That's a good reminder. Uh, I think that's why people, me included in the past, have struggled with forgiveness because we try
Mm.
to do it up here, rationalize it, justify it,
Hmm.
all the
Find a
logic.
reason to forgive
Yeah,
them.
yeah. And, well, I'm going to forgive him, but then I'm not going to call him and, all this mess. It's
Hmm.
all intellectual idea of forgiveness. But like you said,
Right.
when we realize the forgiver is in us,
Hmm.
and that's our nature, our new nature in as a born again uh, Christ follower, that we kind of take off that idea of forgiveness and then learn what his forgiveness and expression of forgiveness really is.
Right. And it's funny you say that, learn what his is. I think that's what he's teaching me right now, because I just when I was driving home, I kind of had the thought, the true nature of forgiveness isn't actually about you. And that's where the ego comes from, is that forgiveness is about me. And so your logic is, well, I want to let this go. I don't want it in my heart. I don't want to hold a
Mm-hmm.
grudge. I don't want to care about it anymore. When the true nature of forgiveness is the gift of the release from shame and guilt to the other person. That, I mean, think about when you've made a mistake in your life. And
Mm-hmm.
it's really easy at times to justify our actions based on what the other person did. But still, in a vacuum, you might not necessarily feel good about what you've done. And if someone gave you the gift of being free from that shame and guilt, that, again, the example from The Chosen, when they go out to the outskirts of town and Melech is burdened with a broken leg and the thoughts that he might have killed that Jew all those times ago. And when Jesus tells him that he didn't die, Melech starts sobbing. He is freed from the shame and guilt that he was carrying around endlessly of what a terrible person he was, the crime he had committed, the things he had done. And I think that that is where we have accepted the world's scale and value judgment of what is a forgivable and an unforgivable offense, as opposed to the resurrection without exception is, no matter what you've done. Were you caught in adultery? Were you a tax collector? Are you a sinner? Are you a prodigal son? Are you a fisherman who gambles and drinks and curses? All of those people, Jesus walked right up to and said, "Follow me." All of those people he walked right up to and said, "Neither do I condemn you." And part of that was because that was the gift that the Lord had been able to give him in the flesh. And by giving, you receive. And so
Mm-hmm.
Jesus, by giving to the rest of the world, ultimately received the rest of the world into his heart so that he could take it up to heaven. And so I feel like that's a decent place to pause. I do have
Mm.
another couple thoughts, but we'll pick this one up in the next episode.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Talk to you soon.